Vesta lifted her wine glass slowly, the kind of slow that means she'd been waiting for this moment all evening. The table had 12 people. Mason's family, some of their closest friends, white tablecloth, candles lit, a dinner that looked like warmth but felt like a performance. She smiled at everyone the way a queen smiles at subjects. "My son could have married a star," she said. She glanced warmly at Calla, the woman beside Mason's older cousin, all glossy hair and easy confidence. But instead, Vesta's smile turned toward me, sweet as syrup. "He brought home a stray." The laugh that followed was sharp and startled, like a plate breaking. People didn't know whether to lean into it or away from it, so most of them leaned in. My face burned, my hands went completely numb around my water glass. Mason's jaw tightened beside me. He stared at his plate, didn't speak. Vesta's eyes stayed locked on mine, glittering, waiting for me to react, to cry, to snap, to give her the reaction she'd set the whole evening up for. I forced a small smile onto my face, but inside something went absolutely still. She had just tried to take my name in public, and she had no idea what she'd just started. "My name is Elowen Price. I fought too hard for too long to be reduced to a punchline at someone else's dinner table." In Vesta's bathroom, I gripped the sink, breathed through the heat burning behind my eyes, refused to let the tears come because crying was what she wanted. Crying meant she'd won, and it would become tomorrow's story about how sensitive I was. Mason knocked softly. "You okay?" he asked through the door. I wanted to scream everything. I said, "I'm fine." Because fine was what women said when they were swallowing humiliation to preserve peace. When I walked back out, Vesta greeted me loudly. "There she is, our little survivor." She said survivor the way some people say stain, with affection that was actually discussed wearing a costume. I sat back down, spine completely straight, face neutral. I wasn't going to argue tonight. I wasn't going to give her a scene to narrate afterward. I was going to watch how she moved, watch who laughed, watch what she did when she thought she had total control. Because people show you exactly who they are when they believe there are no consequences. I was going to pay very close attention. The next family dinner had place cards for everyone except me. My spot had a small white card that read simply, "Guest," not Elowen, not Mason's wife, just guest. Vesta smiled when I found it, innocent, wide-eyed. "Oh, I wasn't sure how to spell your name," she said lightly. "It's so unusual." Mason frowned. "Mom, it's on our wedding invitation. You have the invitation framed in your hallway." Vesta laughed, waved her hand. "Well, darling, you know how I am with unfamiliar things." Unfamiliar. The word settled over me like something cold. Not family, not loved, not even worth learning. Just unfamiliar. I picked up the card, pulled a pen from my bag, wrote my name in clean, clear letters, Elowen Price. Placed it back in the holder, looked directly at Vesta. Her expression flickered. A quick flash of annoyance she covered immediately with a smile. But I'd seen it. That tiny flicker was information. She expected me to say nothing, except the erasure. Be grateful for the empty seat they'd allowed me. I'd corrected my own name at her table instead. It was small, just a card. Just 3 seconds. But it felt like oxygen. Calla found me alone in the kitchen between courses. She smiled warmly, like we'd been friends for years, like this was all perfectly natural. "She's a lot, I know," Calla whispered, nodding toward the dining room where Vesta's laughter was carrying through the wall. "But she means well underneath everything." I looked at her. She touched my arm lightly, casual, friendly. "Mason and I were close for a long time," she added. Said it like she was mentioning the weather, like it was simply a fact I should absorb comfortably. My stomach twisted. "I'm sure you'll get used to her eventually," Calla added, kindly, like she was offering advice. Used to her. Like cruelty was weather I needed to learn to dress for. I watched her smile, watched her drift back toward the dining room, heard Vesta's voice rise with delight when Calla reappeared, and I understood something clearly. Calla wasn't here accidentally. She hadn't been invited randomly, out of warmth or nostalgia. She was part of the set Vesta had arranged. A prop designed to make a specific comparison. A star to stand next to the stray. And I had just been handed that information directly. That night at home, I kept my voice quiet. Steady. Didn't make it a fight. "I need you to say something next time," I told Mason. Even one sentence. He sat on the edge of the bed, His shoulders curved forward like I'd asked him to carry something enormously heavy. "I don't want to start a war with her," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "Mason, it's already a war." I kept my voice gentle. "I'm just the only one who's bleeding from it." He flinched. I watched that land. Then he said, "She'll calm down. You just need to give her more time." Time. The thing people always told women to give to people hurting them. Like patience was the cure for someone else's cruelty. I nodded, didn't argue further, but something hardened in my chest. I understood something important in that moment. If Mason wouldn't automatically protect me, I needed to learn how to protect myself. Without screaming, without collapsing, without becoming someone bitter and hard who I didn't recognize in the mirror. I needed to be smarter than the situation, and I needed to start immediately. The family group chat lit up the next day with photos from dinner. Vesta had posted several, nice lighting, good angles, everyone smiling and warm. Her caption read, "So wonderful having everyone together, especially our star guest." She tagged Kala. I scrolled through the photos. In every single one that I appeared in, I was cut off at the edge, half my face, a shoulder, the back of my head, not centered, not included, not even accidentally present. A cousin commented, "Wait, where's Elowen?" Vesta replied within 2 minutes, "Oh, she was there somewhere." Somewhere, like I was background furniture that might have been moved around. My hands were shaking when I screenshot it. Not because I was being petty. Not because I was collecting ammunition for a dramatic confrontation, but because I knew from experience how quickly people could rewrite the past. How Vesta would look me in the eye in 3 months and say, "I've never disrespected you." How Mason might start to wonder if he'd imagined things. How family members would shake their heads and say, "She didn't mean it that way." This was proof. Dated. Specific. In her own words. I saved it carefully. At the next gathering, Vesta introduced me to her friend Sylvia with a warm smile. "This is Mason's little friend," she said smoothly. My throat tightened. My pulse jumped. I smiled. "I'm his wife, Elowen." Sylvia blinked, looking momentarily embarrassed. Vesta laughed too loudly. Yes, of course. Forgive me, I misspeak sometimes." But her eyes sharpened the moment Sylvia looked away. 30 minutes later, she caught me near the pantry. Her voice dropped to something quiet and precise. "Correcting me in front of people makes you look insecure," she said. I looked at her directly. "Then don't misname me." Her nostrils flared. She walked away without another word. When I went back to the living room, my knees were shaking. Not from fear, from pure adrenaline, because I had defended myself without screaming, without crying, without making it ugly. I'd spoken 2 sentences, simple and clear, and she'd been the one to walk away. That moment stayed with me the whole drive home. I replayed it multiple times, not because I'd won something enormous, but because I'd proven to myself that it was possible. That I could hold my ground without losing myself in the process. My boss called me into her office on a Tuesday morning. She looked uncomfortable, professional but clearly uncertain about how to have the conversation. "Your mother-in-law called our main office line yesterday," she said. The room felt like it tilted. "She said she wanted to check in on you," my boss continued carefully. "She mentioned she was concerned about your stress levels." Check in. Concerned. Careful words for something that wasn't careful at all. Vesta had called my workplace. Framed it as care. Dressed interference up as worry. That night I showed Mason the call log my boss had sent me in writing. His face went completely pale. "She didn't," he said, almost to himself. "She did." He rubbed his forehead, stayed silent for a long moment. "I'll talk to her," he finally said. "I promise." I nodded, but I didn't feel relief, not real relief. Because I realized that Mason saying he'd handle it and Mason actually being capable of handling it were 2 very different things. Vesta had just crossed into my career. Which meant she'd keep crossing lines until someone made crossing lines cost something real. Mason confronted Vesta the next day. She cried immediately. Perfect tears. Perfect timing. Voice soft and wounded. When Mason came home, he looked like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and hadn't figured out where to set it down. "She says she was just worried about you," he told me. "She says you've seemed unhappy." I kept my voice very quiet. "She called my job, Mason." "I know, she says it came from concern." She told my employer I was stressed, without my permission, without any reason except to insert herself into my professional life. Mason exhaled. She says, "You're too sensitive." That sentence landed harder than anything Vesta had said directly, because it was coming from him. I looked at him for a long time. "If a stranger did exactly what Vesta did," I said carefully, "would you still call it concern?" He went completely silent. The silence stretched out long enough to be an answer. And in that silence, I understood something I'd been trying not to see. This wasn't only about Vesta. This was also about who Mason had been trained to be around her, and whether he could choose differently. At a family brunch the following Sunday, Vesta began a story about rescuing a stray dog. She told it with obvious warmth. Everyone at the table smiled along. Then she reached the end. "Some strays," she said, letting her eyes drift to me with a gentle smile, "bite the hand that feeds them." The table laughed lightly, awkwardly. People studying their plates instead of looking at me. I felt myself starting to shrink. And then I stopped. I set my fork down carefully. "That's a cruel thing to say about anyone," I said calmly. The table went completely quiet. Vesta tilted her head, smile unchanged. "Oh, honey, it's just a story." "Then tell it without looking at me." Her smile tightened, just slightly, just enough for me to see the anger underneath the sweetness. Under the table, Mason's hand found my knee. Finally choosing to be present instead of pretending nothing was happening. Vesta noticed immediately, watched his hand on my knee, watched him choose my side in that small, quiet way. Her eyes narrowed. She had just lost a tiny piece of control over her son. And people like Vesta noticed every single inch. Mason told me Vesta needed help, temporarily. Just while she sorted some things out. I didn't argue immediately, just asked careful questions. Then the bank notification came through on my phone, a transfer from our joint account. Not enormous, but not small either. I showed Mason, asked gently how many times this had happened before. He hesitated too long. "A few times," he admitted. My chest tightened, not with anger at Mason exactly, with something heavier. We were saving for a house, had been budgeting carefully for over a year, tracking every dollar, talking about the life we were building together, and money was quietly leaving. "What's it for?" I asked. "She says it's complicated." Complicated was what people said when they didn't want you asking questions they couldn't answer cleanly. Vesta wasn't just making my daily life smaller and harder. She was reaching into our future and pulling from it, and using our shared savings while blaming the stress on me. I nodded, kept my face neutral, but I opened a new folder that night, started a paper trail. I asked Mason if I could look at the bank statements. He resisted first, then agreed reluctantly. I sat with the documents and felt my stomach drop steadily as I scrolled. Regular transfers, labeled inconsistently. Some as loans, some as gifts. No repayment schedule attached to any of them. I searched my email for Vesta's name and found a thread I hadn't seen before. She'd emailed Mason separately, not on our shared account. Her words were warm and grateful. "Thank you for saving me again. You're such a good son." Saving. Like she was perpetually in crisis. Like Mason was always the rescuer. Like I was the obstacle to that dynamic rather than his actual partner. I sat quietly for a long time after I closed the laptop. I named my folder carefully. Name. Because that was what this entire situation was really about. Underneath all the dinners and the comments and the place cards. Whose name mattered? Who got defined? Who got to write the story of our marriage? And who was expected to accept being written out of it? I was done accepting that arrangement. Mason's sister Bryn pulled me aside at a cousin's birthday gathering. She checked over both shoulders first, making sure Vesta was occupied elsewhere. "She's jealous of you," Bryn said quietly. I blinked, genuinely surprised. Jealous hadn't been a word I'd connected to Vesta. Threatened, maybe. Controlling, definitely. But jealous felt different. Bryn continued, "You're steady, you're real. She can't predict what you're going to do, and she cannot control you." I absorbed that slowly. "She controlled our dad," Bryn added, her voice careful, measured, until he finally left. I didn't know. Nobody had ever mentioned it. "She can't stand being second in someone's life," Bryn said. "Mason choosing you. Choosing partnership over her approval. She took it personally the moment he said your name with that look he gets." I stared at Vesta across the yard. She was laughing, wide and loud, commanding the circle of relatives around her. Suddenly her cruelty looked different. Less like power, more like fear wearing expensive perfume. Fear of being moved to the edge of someone's life. Fear of not being the center of Mason's world anymore. Understanding that didn't excuse anything she'd done, but it made everything clearer. Vesta hosted a special dinner and insisted Calla be invited. "She's practically family," Vesta announced cheerfully when I raised an eyebrow. At the table, Vesta kept returning to Calla throughout the meal. Her career, her recent accomplishments, her elegant apartment, her excellent taste. Then she'd turn to me with a warm smile. "Elowen is still learning her way," she said during dessert, fondly, like she was describing a student making slow progress. I kept my face pleasant. I asked Calla politely about her work. She smiled stiffly, seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Then Calla slipped. "Vesta mentioned you were between jobs at the moment," she said. A beat of silence fell. "I wasn't between jobs, had a full-time position I'd held for 3 years. Mason's jaw tightened visibly. Vesta sipped her wine with perfect innocence. Calla realized immediately she'd exposed something. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood?" I smiled. "You didn't misunderstand, you heard exactly what you were told." I kept my voice pleasant, calm. But something crystallized completely in that moment. Vesta wasn't just humiliating me in rooms I was standing in, she was narrating a version of me to people I hadn't even met yet. I started reclaiming small things. Systematically. Every introduction where someone called me Mason's girl, or sweetheart, or spoke about me like I wasn't present, I corrected it clearly and pleasantly. "I'm Elowen. It's good to meet you." I signed cards with my full name, used my professional title appropriately, stopped accepting the diminishing language without pushback. I started asking direct questions about finances in front of Mason rather than whispering about it privately afterward. Vesta's response was predictable. She became sweeter in public and sharper in private. One night a text came through from her. "A wife should be grateful every single day that a good mother raised a man worth marrying." My hands shook. I typed back, calmly. "A wife deserves respect. Please don't speak to me this way again." Her response was one line. "Don't forget, you were chosen. Chosen. Like I was a rescue animal that had been selected from a shelter out of someone's charity." I saved the conversation, added it to my folder. Then I sat for a while with the weight of it, and decided that the right response to being called astray was to become impossible to erase. Mason agreed to couples therapy. I'd asked once, calmly, without ultimatums. Just told him, "I'm not willing to live like this indefinitely. I need us to try something different." He agreed. In the first real session, the therapist asked Mason what he was afraid of. He said, "Disappointing my mother." The therapist asked, "And what happens when you disappoint your wife instead?" Mason went completely silent. A long, telling silence. I felt tears press forward, not from sadness exactly, from recognition. Because that was the first time someone had said it out loud, had named what had been happening, had made it real and visible in a room where Mason had to sit with it. After the session, he held my hand walking to the car. Held it tighter than usual. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I keep making you pay for something that isn't about you." It was small, but it was real. Present, his. Then his phone buzzed 3 times in a row, Vesta's name on the screen each time. Mason looked at the phone, then at me, then put it face down on the center console and kept driving. I watched his hand tremble slightly from the effort. I knew Vesta was about to feel him pulling away. Vesta invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us. No Mason, no buffer. She was warm, attentive, touched my hand across the table. "I want us to have real peace," she said. Her eyes earnest, voice soft. "I'm sorry if things I've said were misunderstood." Misunderstood. The classic construction of someone who wanted credit for apologizing without actually taking responsibility for anything. But I stayed calm, let her speak. Then she reached into her bag, slid a folder across the table toward me. "Just something practical," she said pleasantly. "A postnuptial agreement, to protect Mason's assets. You understand?" I looked at the folder, didn't open it. Protect Mason. From me. This was the real purpose of the lunch. I pushed the folder gently back across the table. "No." Her warmth evaporated, instantly, completely. "Refusing proves what I've always suspected about your motivations," she said. Voice like ice. I stood up slowly. "My name is Elowen Price," I said. Voice steady. And I don't sign away my dignity to earn a seat at your table. I walked out, my knees were shaking, but my spine was completely straight. After I refused to sign, things shifted across the family. Invitations started arriving late, or not at all. Events happened without us being told. Vesta told several relatives I was controlling Mason, isolating him from family, that she was worried. Bryn warned me what was being said. Texted me privately. She's telling people you're only in this for financial security. My stomach turned. It was the next logical move. If she couldn't make me small with cruelty, she'd make me small with rumors. Isolate me. Make me seem dangerous and calculating. Hope I'd either submit completely or leave on my own. I didn't chase them. Didn't argue back through relatives or text explanations to cousins who probably didn't need them. Instead, I invested in my own life. Took the certification course I'd been delaying for 2 years. Updated my professional profiles. Strengthened friendships outside Mason's family that were genuinely mine. Every time Vesta tried to shrink me, I expanded deliberately somewhere she couldn't reach. Growth as resistance. Visibility as refusal. The quietest form of defiance there was. At a family gathering 3 weeks later, Vesta made an offhand comment about financial stress, loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear. I've had to borrow from Mason lately, she said, sighing softly, because Elowen wasn't willing to help. The room went still, my pulse spiked, I felt heat rise up my neck, but I kept my voice completely level. I've never been asked, I said. Vesta blinked, tried to laugh it off. Well, you know how these things are. No, I said pleasantly, I don't, because no one asked me. People exchanged glances. I saw Bryn's eyes go wide across the table. Vesta's face tightened. She had told people I refused to help. Had used that story to paint me as selfish, as the reason Mason was strained, and she'd just exposed it publicly without meaning to. The lie she'd been using to rewrite my character had slipped out in the wrong direction at the wrong moment. I didn't press it, didn't pile on, just let the silence hold the truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was say the simple, clear thing and let other people do the math. That evening, Mason and I sat down at the kitchen table with printed bank statements. Real numbers, dates, amounts, a year and a half of transfers, laid out cleanly in front of us. Mason went pale before we were halfway through. She said these were small, he said quietly, almost to himself. They weren't small, I said gently. He added them up, twice. Like he needed to see the total more than once to believe it. His voice cracked slightly. She used me. I reached across and took his hand. She trained you to believe that helping her was love, and that saying no was abandonment. That's different from you being naive or weak. His eyes were wet. We could have bought the house. I know. I kept thinking each time was the last time. I know. He looked at me. That really looked at me. We're done. I'm cutting it off completely. His phone lit up on the table, Vesta calling. Mason picked it up, put it on speaker. Mom, no more money. The silence on the other end lasted several full seconds. Then Vesta's voice came through, cold and precise. So the stray finally bit. A cousin's major anniversary dinner was announced, formal event, speeches planned. Vesta immediately inserted herself as a speaker. Of course she did. Bryn warned us privately. She invited Calla again. And she's been telling people she's going to say something meaningful about family. Meaningful. The word sat in my stomach like something heavy. Mason said, "We're going together, and I will handle my mother this time. I mean it." I believed he meant it. I also knew meaning something and being equipped for something were different things when it came to Vesta. So I prepared quietly alongside trusting him. Printed the transfer records. Organized the postnuptial proposal email. Saved the workplace call documentation. Arranged everything into one clean folder. Not to cause a scene at someone else's celebration, but because I was done walking into rooms where Vesta had the floor and I had nothing. She liked having the microphone. Liked the way people faced her when she spoke. Liked the way a room leaned toward her when she cleared her throat. If she decided to use that microphone the way she always had, I wasn't going to snatch it from her hands. I was going to make her regret what she chose to say into it. The venue was beautiful. Flowers, soft lighting, tables set with obvious care. Vesta arrived like she was the honoree rather than a guest. She kissed Mason's cheek a beat too long, barely glanced at me. Calla was already there. She smiled politely at me. Her eyes darted between Vesta and me like someone calculating distances. She knew she was a prop tonight. I could see it on her face, the discomfort of understanding your role in someone else's performance. Before we sat down, Vesta made a slow circuit of the nearest tables. I heard her tell a cluster of relatives, her voice warm and carrying. Mason always did have a soft spot for strays. My stomach flipped. Mason's jaw tightened. He started to speak. Vesta interrupted brightly. "Save it for my toast, darling." The way she said it, that particular confidence, like she'd already written what was coming and enjoyed knowing we hadn't read it yet. My skin prickled. Rory always says the most powerful thing you can be in a room is the calmest person in it. I took a slow breath, found my seat, and waited. Vesta took the microphone to a light round of applause. She thanked the family beautifully, praised the couple being honored, said all the right things in all the right order. Then she shifted, the way she always shifted. Like a door turning on a hinge. "My son," she said warmly, "has always deserved someone exceptional." She looked toward Calla, her smile soft and meaningful, someone stellar. Calla's face flushed with obvious discomfort. Then Vesta turned her smile directly onto me. "But he chose." She paused, a breath perfectly timed. "Well, he chose a stray we've tried very hard to welcome home." A few people chuckled, uncertain, looking anywhere but at me. Mason stood up. "Mom, stop." His voice was tight, present, finally there. Vesta waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, hush, darling. Everyone knows I'm just joking." Then she looked back at the room with a wider smile, louder. "Elowen should be grateful we brought her in from the cold." I stood up, didn't reach for the microphone, just stood at my full height and said clearly enough for the front tables to hear, "My name is not Stray." Vesta blinked. "Excuse me?" "My name is Elowen Price, and I'm finished being renamed for your entertainment." The room went absolutely still. Vesta laughed toward the room, tried to make it light. "Always so dramatic," she said into the mic. I kept my voice even, clear, unhurried. "You contacted my employer and raised false concerns about my stability," I said. "You presented a postnuptial agreement without my knowledge or Mason's consultation, and you borrowed money from Mason repeatedly while telling family I refused to contribute." Audible gasps rippled through the tables. Mason stepped forward and stood beside me. "It's true," he said. Steady, simple. Vesta's face drained, color leaving it in stages. "How dare you?" she started, her voice cracking at the edges now, losing its shape. I opened my folder, didn't wave the documents, didn't read from them dramatically, just walked to the event coordinator standing at the edge of the room and handed the folder to her calmly. "I'm not going to turn this into a scene at someone else's celebration," I said quietly to the coordinator. "Could you hold this?" That single move changed everything in the room. People saw it clearly. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was trying to stop her. Outside, Mason looked at Vesta and said the words she'd spent years making impossible for him to say. "You're ruining this family, Mom, not Elowen." Vesta stared at him, waiting for him to soften, to apologize, to return. He didn't. After that evening, the family shifted. Some relatives kept their distance because truth made comfortable people uncomfortable. That was expected. It was still easier for them to choose polite silence than clarity. But Bryn called me 2 days later. "Thank you," she said, "for saying what nobody would say." Calla sent a message the following week. "I didn't understand I was being used as a comparison," she wrote. "I'm genuinely sorry. Mason and I set clear boundaries together. No private loans, no surprise visits, no public commentary about our marriage. Violation of any of these meant we wouldn't attend." Vesta tried once more. Posted something online that hinted at my motives, the usual language. But the room had heard her, had watched her, had seen Mason choose partnership over appeasement in real time. And the story she'd been telling about me couldn't hold the same shape anymore. The most meaningful part wasn't Vesta's embarrassment. It was my peace. I updated my professional name back to Price. Not as an attack, not as a rejection of Mason. As a declaration. I am not a stray someone collected. I am not a guest at my own life. I am a woman with a history, a spine, and a name that belongs entirely to me. The next time I sit at a table, there's no performance, no ranking system. Just quiet, steady respect. Or I don't stay. And that's how I took back my name. Not by becoming louder than her, by becoming impossible to erase.